I think it was April of 1983. I walked on the court for the defending NCAA champion UCLA Bruins. I was 22-0. I was undefeated. I just tied Jimmy Connor's record. I was on the cusp of breaking pretty much every single season record UCLA had ever had. A year later, I was living in my van. I had quit the team. I had quit tennis. I had dropped out of school, drinking and drugging around the clock. And the obvious question is, what happened?
This is Holding Court with Patrick McEnroe.
All right, time for another edition of Holding Court. Patrick McEnroe here. Very much looking forward to this one. My good buddy, Barry Buss, who has written really a tremendous book called You Can't Get There From Here. Since now, Barry, I've elevated going video, for season 4. We got a little video here. It's an unbelievable read. You've been on the pod before, but so much has happened since the last time we spoke on the podcast. We obviously stay in touch personally via text and so on, but kind of tell the audience what's transpired since the book has been released. I know you've been out touring it to different places, particularly in Southern California, where you grew up playing tennis. So give us a little bit of insight into sort of how your world has changed since the book came out.
Gosh, yeah, thank you so much for having me on first and foremost. And I do remember that was about 2 years ago. I was on the pod the first time, and I was talking about doing this book and getting it out and trying to get it out on March 10th, 2022, which would have been the 10-year anniversary of my sobriety. So I got it out that day. And the interesting thing, when I was writing it, I knew I was going to come forward with a lot of mental health stuff, that I had not talked publicly about. And in the course of writing the book, all of a sudden, Naomi Osaka had her situation, Simone Biles had hers, and Marty Fish had his Netflix documentary come out. So like, oh boy, it wasn't being received as well as I thought it would have at first. So I was a little nervous when I put it out there, but I just have to tell you, it's been so well received, and I've been just so grateful that when you put yourself out there in these situations, you feel like you're all alone. What I've really learned here is I'm not. And I was telling a lot of people's story through my story, and the reception has just been so overwhelming and super positive. And just trying to take it to the next step forward. Every day there's a new headline with something happening in mental health and mental wellness, and we're all just trying to navigate this. There's a lot of information out there, and just trying to take the next steps forward with this.
Well, let me take us all a couple of steps back, because for those who don't know Barry's story and didn't hear him on my previous podcast, Barry was a highly successful junior tennis player and a collegiate tennis player, a little bit older than me, but from that same era of junior tennis. And you moved when you were a young kid out to Southern California from the Massachusetts area to pursue tennis. Your dad, you talk about him a lot in the book, and that relationship, how strained that was for you, him pushing you. But sort of give us a little overview of junior tennis for you, and then obviously going into college, which is where your drinking problems and your drug problems really sort of took over your life. I know you started dealing with them as a teenager, and as you said, obviously there were a lot of issues, mental health related issues that you were dealing with that nobody really knew what they were at that point. So what was it like as you were navigating these issues that you were having as a teenager? And then of course, what started out as a very successful collegiate career, but ended up in disaster.
Yeah. So I think it was April of 1983. I walked on the court for the defending NCAA champion UCLA Bruins. I was 22-0. I was undefeated. I just tied Jimmy Connor's record. I was on the cusp of breaking pretty much every single season record UCLA had ever had. A year later, I was living in my van. I had quit the team. I had quit tennis. I had dropped out of school, drinking and drugging around the clock. And the obvious question is, what happened? And to those who were paying or, going through my life with me at that time, it had been happening all along. The signs were all there, from my earliest ages, and junior tennis is stressful. It's complicated, as we all know. But just seemed I acted out a little more than everybody else. I got a little more upset. I choked a little harder. Just the panic that came along with playing. I was kind of a kid in distress there. So it was happening all along. These were kind of screams for help at a very young age. And by the time I got to California, I was 14 years old, and I just started once I discovered alcohol and drugs, I became dangerously self-medicating, the angst that was going on in my head. Now I was able to get away with it for a little while. I was young, and and I was just playing tennis, and it kind of had this inertia to it. But eventually it caught up to me. And one of the challenges for our era in many ways is, this was 40 years ago, and nobody knew anything about alcoholism or addiction or mental health or bipolar disorder. Or certainly nobody was just talking about it publicly. And so I kind of give everybody a pass back then. When we go back and review the tapes, like, gosh, I wish could have done more for you, or and been able to help you. But I don't think there was really the infrastructure in place at that time. But my real driving force behind my life now is what happens if I roll into town today. Talented, troubled, problems at home. Are the programs in place? Are the safeguards in place to keep young lives like mine from spiraling so out of control? Because I really, truly believe with the information we have today, if that was applied to me at a much younger age, I think a lot of the difficulties I had could have been avoided.
You talk about the stresses of junior tennis, and obviously I'm well aware of those as
Yeah.
well. Though I was speaking to an old friend of mine who ended up playing on the tour, actually from Southern Cal, and he has some of his kids playing junior tennis. My daughter been playing some junior tennis, and I said to him, it seems like it's a lot more difficult now than it was when we were kids. I said, why is that? He says, well, part of it is because we won all the time. Now, I want to ask you that too,
That's
because you won a lot. I mean,
yeah,
you were a top junior,
yeah,
and then as you said, you wanted a full scholarship to UCLA, which means you're one of the top recruits in the
right,
country.
right.
So why do you think it was so even more, despite the fact that you were winning a lot? What made it so stressful? And then obviously you turned to the drugs and to the alcohol at a young age. But what for you personally made it that stressful, even though you were winning a lot?
Right. No, I think that's an important point. I think one of the things we're understanding, I mean, I don't know if just the data that's out now about mental health, and even so much so, the Surgeon General came out and declared a national emergency just a couple years ago. Teen rates of depression and anxiety and OCD and self harm are just through the roofs. And back when we were young kids, we kind of I think environment just plays a tremendously large role in the development of issues and stuff. And not everyone in a tough environment is gonna struggle, but I did. I didn't. It was kind of you're as adults, when we go under a lot of stress, we can all relate to this in the sense that when you're under constant stress, things generally don't get better; they get a little worse. And if you have some underlying conditions, like I did, I was brought up with a very loving but overbearing father who just did not know the boundaries of what would be considered support in an emotional and psychological way, and what was that kind of old school motivation. So I really struggled with it. So there was no real safe place for me to go. I never had a coach. I never really had my brothers and I weren't getting along very well. So we just never really had any place to go with my stuff. So I just internalized everything a little bit more than the average person. And at some point, when you're under that much stress for that long, even though I had quite a bit of success, I wasn't being built for the long haul. It was going to break.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about your story and what you're pointing out now is that people assume, and that's why I asked the question. People assume that because you're successful,
Right.
everything's fine. Like, well, why is this guy stressed out? Why is he having mental issues? He's so successful. But the truth is that it goes a lot deeper than that. I want to get into what you're looking to do. You said your book is called, again, You Can Get There From Here. So getting there, and I know that the response to your book has been so good over the course of the last year. I know there's something that you're working hard on called the Kickstarter program, which is going to dive into all these issues. So please tell us a little bit about that program and what you're hoping to do and hoping to accomplish.
No, thank you. I think part of what we're experiencing right now as in society is a kind of a revolution of mental health awareness, and I think everybody's talking about it. It's you can't miss it now. It's out there. So I think the next step is where are the programs in place? What are we going to do now? We need to take some action here. And as I was mentioning before, environment, there are two main contributors to mental health. And I think genetics is one, and then environment is another. And there's some obvious, issues with environment, with if you grow up in a household of domestic violence or substance abuse or tragedy, kids really do struggle. But I think the tennis world, and when we pull back a little bit, and we've already talked about how stressful it is. What effect does that have on a young person going through? Because the athletic journey is long and it's demanding, and we have to be all in from 8 to 28, and there's all kinds of obstacles and potholes along the way. So my goal here is to develop kind of an industry-wide initiative towards mostly emotional literacy and focusing on emotional intelligence. I think all parties involved, not just the players, but I mean the coaches. I think the organizations, how we structure competition, I think is really important. Particularly in the younger ages. I mean, the single elimination when you're in the 10 and unders is kind of crazy. It should be more of a team
Right.
thing.
Right.
Keep these kids in. We don't want the burnout and the dropout happening so much. But I think most importantly with the parents too. The parents, whether they want to acknowledge this or not, they're managing young professional careers, or if not professional careers, certainly college scholarship capable careers, and they are the most important person for an awful long time in the development of a young player. And if they don't have their head in the game, it's like you have to, if they don't have their own house in order, you cannot transmit something you have not got. So if they're not healthy and they're just passing on their anxiety and stress onto their child, there's no way, it just doesn't work. And as a coach, I've watched this happen over and over and over again over the years. So I'm really trying hard to develop a curriculum right now, to a really tennis-centered curriculum. There's a lot of data and information out there on emotional intelligence and emotional literacy. You see it happening in schools already. We have anti-bullying programs. There's all kinds of different things they're trying to implement and kind of pilot programs around the country right now. And I'm really going to try to bring this into the tennis world. I want everybody to kind of be able to take a stress reactivity test, emotional intelligence test, find out where you are, find out where you want to become, and understand this journey that you're on, all the things that are going to come your way, and we'll have a solution for it. It's kind of instead of shot selection, we'll have thought selection. We'll be able to manage
I like that. Yeah.
We'll be able to manage our emotion. We can think our way through situations. Kind of the old adage, we don't cry over spilt milk. That's an overreaction to a minor event here. Tennis is not all that dissimilar, and we have to understand that this pathway and healthy perspective of it's up down. You're going to have tough years. You're going to have injuries. You've got to be able to stay the course through the process. And I think, and most importantly, my main goal is just to get everybody to maximize the return on your investment. So when you hit your last ball, from your first ball to your last ball, you're able to segue into adult life with the skills you've learned here. You're not beat up and don't need therapy or rehab or just sitting here having regrets for the next 10, 20 years about what could have been. I think the main goal is that people are able to take the skills we learn in tennis, regardless of how much success you have, and apply that to your career, your education, your relationships, your family, pickleball, whatever it may be.
Don't get me started on pickleball. But that's another topic for another. I could go on. We could go on and on about that.
That'll be season 5, right?
Yeah, exactly, season 5. But Alexis Castori is a mental performance coach. I had her on the podcast, and she's going to be in this season 4 as well, along with you. And she, in speaking to her, she's worked with a couple of professionals like Andy Murray and Simona Halep, which she's honest about because they went public with it. But she says most of her work that she does now is with young kids, mostly female, but some male as well, mostly tennis and golf players, but she, works with all students. And I said to her in the course of our podcast, of our recording, I said, Alexis, what happens when the kid or the parents realize, because like you said, we want young kids playing together in teams. And I think the reason we lose a lot of kids at 13, 14 is because of the individual nature, and also because and what she explained to me, she said, at 10, 11, every parent thinks their kid can be a pro.
Right.
And then at 12, 13, it starts to become, maybe that's not going to happen. And then, by 14 or 15, for 99% of the players playing junior tennis, they realize they're not going to be a pro, having nothing to do with anything other than just genetics, right? Pure genetics, genetic physical ability. And then when you get to the pros, as I was lucky enough to do, then a lot of those other things become more important. Your overall fitness, how you eat, how tough you are. But from the standpoint of a junior player, and I asked her, why should kids stay in the game? Right. And she had a great answer, which was all the different skills that tennis can teach you, and all the companies that want to hire individuals that played competitive tennis. They don't care if they played number one on their college team at UCLA or Stanford, but they competed because it teaches you so many life skills. And I feel like that has to be an important part of the equation, because to your point, the parents are so important, and the parents have this idea that their kids at a young age are going to be a professional, when the reality is that's almost minuscule, the chances of that happening.
Right, right. No, no, I completely agree. I think, one of the unique aspects of tennis is you have to give every fiber of yourself to an activity here, and to have that frequently not be good enough, and that's a unique pain, and it's not for everybody. That's a real tough thing to acknowledge here. So it can't be about being the best. I would joke around, if I have 100 people take my course and there's only 10 trophies, not everyone's going to get a trophy. So it's not a matter of, as you said, it's genetics a lot of times. But I just think I think the application and being able to apply yourself fully to something, making yourself vulnerable to the incredible highs and lows of the tennis life. It builds grit, it builds resiliency, it builds a lot of character. And I think, as we go into careers in adult life, those skills are invaluable. I think when you apply them to the realities of parenting, and just in all the things that we go through.
Fascinating discussion here with Barry Buss. Again, his book is called You Can Get There From Here. When we come back, we'll take a quick break here on Holding Court. I want to ask Barry about some specific memories he has of his junior career and his college career, because I'm telling you, he goes deep in this book. And some of the stories, especially with Coach Glenn Bassett, the famous legendary coach at UCLA, you will not want to miss that. We'll be back on Holding Court. North Organic CBD is our sponsor here on Holding Court. I love their CBD gummies. They come in 2 delicious flavors, strawberry lemonade and green apple. I take both. Both are amazing. 1 a day, and you are totally okay. I love to stay active. I still play tennis regularly. I love to hike. I love to go to the gym. That's why I use North Organic's CBD. Their products are made in the USA. They're high quality, broad spectrum organic CBD products for everyday adventures. And don't forget about the very popular CBD salve. Immediate relief of any physical pain. I use it on my shoulder. Although I'm not serving quite as big as I used to, but you know what I mean. I use it daily for the shoulders, as I said, for the knees, for the hips, you name it. It works wonders. Go to northorganicscbd.com and enter Patrick20. That's Patrick20 for 20% off your order. All right, back on Holding Court. Patrick McEnroe here. Barry Buss is my guest. His book entitled You Can Get There From Here, his story about how he overcame drugs, alcohol, and just the junior and collegiate tennis story that he went through. But Barry, I want to ask you about some of the specific stories you bring up in college, because, Glenn, I was coached by Dick Gould, one of the legendary college coaches from Stanford. Then there was Coach Glenn Bassett. They were very different personalities. And I remember one time saying to Coach Gould, I said, man, you really don't like that Coach Bassett, do you? He goes, I love him. That's why I want to kick his ass. So there were two of the biggest programs at that time when we were playing in college in the mid to late mid 80s. Your stories, I mean, he was one of the most mild-mannered guys out there, Coach Bassett, and you were, showing up late. You were hungover. You were, in fact, sometimes you sound like you were drunk playing matches. Talk about some of the situations that you remember and that you talk about in the book that came up with Coach Bassett and others at UCLA.
Well, it's actually fascinating how I even met him the first time. I was having a real hard time my last year in the 18s. I had a series of terrible behavioral breakdowns in Southern California that Coach Bassett happened to be at, and I'd heard through the grapevine that he had told other people like Jim Pugh's father that there's just no way this bus kid, there's no way he'll ever play for me. And then he went up to we were up at Ojai, and he was actually recruiting a couple of the people that I was playing, and I managed to somehow keep my mouth shut and just play as well as I could play. And I remember he waved me over after the match, and he just looked at me and he goes, "Hey, that was just like that was like an away match up there. I love the way you hung in there. Now let me ask you a question: which player would I be getting, the kid from Long Beach or this guy?"
Right, right.
I said, "I don't know, coach. I think that was you probably getting both."
Right.
But I never had a coach growing up. I was kind of a unique player in the sense I was fortunate to be in Southern California where there was just so many great players. So I was self-taught. So I'd never had somebody to really push me and ask the most of me. And when I got to UCLA, within a matter of a week, I would have ran through a wall for him. He just motivated me. He believed in me. He was so positive. It was just it was everything I ever needed, everything I ever wanted, and I wanted to. There's nothing I ever wanted more than to make that top six for him. But then once we got going, he had a kind of a one system. I'd never played that much tennis. I'd never drilled like that before. I'd never been pushed like that before. And he was with me, but at the same time, he was kind of an old school mentality, one size fit all. And I was a little bit out of the mold for him, to say the
Right.
least. So I don't think he signed on for what I brought there to him. But we did have some wonderful memories later on in my life when I would see him periodically throughout Westwood and stuff. He was very gracious. And
Tell me about the fact that you never had a coach, because your
yeah,
dad,
so
I mean, because let me get a little background on your dad. Your dad was like a mathematical genius,
right,
right? And
right,
he had you playing chess when you were quite young, and
right.
that was part of his career. He was like worked in the
Aerospace, he wrote
aerospace
software.
industry,
Yeah,
right? Right. So
yeah.
he was, obviously a brilliant guy, but you had a very tough relationship with him. Why was that? What was it?
Well,
What
so
was that about?
he was a Depression era kid, which like a lot of our parents were, and he never really got the opportunities to do the things that we do. Is the generation gap between having enough to eat and me having enough strung rackets was quite significant for him.
Good point.
So
Right. Right.
so it always was a little hard for him to understand how a kid like me could have the opportunities I had, and then maybe not see them all the way through, or just give every fiber of my being. But what happened for him is he was obsessed with special people. Whether it was Bobby Fischer, the chess player, or mathematicians, or just Mozart, child prodigies, really. And when I started to show some talent at tennis, that became his project. He was going to live out his kind of frustrated athletic.
Because you tried a few things before tennis, right? When you were
Yeah,
living up in
I
Massachusetts.
was doing math. I was playing hockey. I was doing chess. I was doing math. There was a lot of things going. But then once I won my first little tournament, he said, "Okay, this is the sport we're gonna chase." And of course, he happened to love it. So the next thing you know, there's a line against the garage for me to hit. There was a toss box in my room to work on my toss. We went and bought another house to put a court in that he built himself. I mean, he got into it. So you can play a tournament darn near every weekend once you get going on that stuff. So but then once we came out to California, he helped me for a little bit till I was about 12, and he tore his Achilles tendon, and I really just didn't have anybody to help me with. So I fortunately, when we got to California, it was ground zero for junior tennis. There was Bolletarian in Florida, and there was kind of Southern California, South Bay, Palos Verdes area. And every day I had, John Letts and Jorge Lozano and Derek Restano and to practice with. And these kids were just everywhere, and everybody was hungry, and we just beat on each other every day. And all of a sudden, if you had any athleticism, you were going to get pretty good. And so, but at the same time, not having anyone to be accountable to allowed me
Right.
to kind of keep my secrets. At 14, I was getting high almost every day. I would always go out and play. I got my tennis in. It just, so I never
What
really
about
had any.
school? What was your situation at school
I
when
was
you were
smart
in the
enough to get through it. So no, nobody was really paying a whole lot of attention to me. Not at home. I certainly not at my club. So I wasn't doing anything that was standing out one way or the other. I mean, so nobody was, so by the time I did get caught for the first time, with the Junior Davis Cup team, I've been doing it for almost 4 years, and it was pretty locked in by then. So it wasn't going to be that easy for me to stop, and in a weird way, I kind of wish I had gotten caught when I was younger, which might have, been able to kind of stop my downfall that way. But
and your mother situation,
yeah,
how did she
it's
handle
always
all
a
of
tough one for a lot of people when I do read the book, because my mom is
it?
so
Yep.
absent in that story. And my father was such a dominating figure in our house. I mean, he just ruled by fear, and my brother suffered from it similarly, in different ways than I did. And my mom just kind of never really got a chance to be her own person. She just got overwhelmed by him too. So there was no, when Dad would rage and so forth. You would always hope your mom would come in and kind of make things better and smooth things over, but just never worked that way. So and only now have I really gotten to know her better. At 50 years old, I think I had my first real conversation with her. It was a real,
Amazing,
you
amazing.
know,
I know you, and I know you settled. You met a great lady, and you
yeah,
made the move to Nashville a couple
there
of
and there.
years ago.
Yeah.
Now, and you just said you said at the beginning of the pod that when you wrote this book, it was 10 years since you became sober.
Yes.
What tell everyone how you got. I mean, it's a long story. It's in the book, but like that moment when you're like, okay, because I know you went into rehab, you came
Right.
out, you were hooked again. What finally got you over the hump?
I'm going to tell the Trey story here.
Okay, please do. Yeah.
So it was March 10th of 2012. I had not inhaled a sober breath for several years, and I went to see one of my favorite performers, Trey Anastasio, the lead guitar player for the jam band Fish, and he was performing in front of the LA Philharmonic. And I got up there, and he had struggled with sobriety himself, and he was about 5-6 years sober, and I was in the event and just watching my guitar hero sober up on the stage, just living out his artistic dreams to the fullest. And I just so wasn't, and it just really hit me profoundly. It's like, wow, I've really let this get away from me. And it was that night, and I didn't have a whole lot of hope. I didn't have a lot of strength left to fight, the illnesses I had. But I just made a commitment that night to try one more time. That was March 10th of 2012, and on Friday of this week, March 10, 2023, I'll celebrate 11 years of sobriety. Now, the ultimate gift in this, I've donated. I made the Divided Sky Foundation, which is the charitable wing of the Fish company, a beneficiary of my books. Every dollar of every sale goes to their fund. And I got an email from them a couple of weeks ago, and they wanted to have a Zoom meeting with me. So I get on with the gal, and she sits down. She goes, "Did I tell you Trey's going to be on the call?" And I said, "Oh
No
my,
way.
you did not
Right.
tell me this."
Right.
Thank God you didn't tell me this. I would have
Right.
been come unhinged. So Trey came on the call, and
Wow.
then Trey starts in. He goes, "I read your book, and I just have to tell you, you told my story." And we
Wow.
proceeded to talk for 45 minutes. And he shared about his
Amazing.
upbringing. Yeah, it all came full circle. I just still on cloud 9,000 on that one. But
That's awesome. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, so it's just been it's been a whirlwind. It's been just super super exciting to be able to touch people at all levels of society here. And it's always a little nervous when you put yourself out there, but I just super grateful for how it's all worked out.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you are in the process of changing a lot of lives. So
Thank you.
before I let you go, I want to tell you something which I think is a real positive, and then I want to get your take on. I was actually had Pam Shriver on recently. She's now actually coaching with Donna Vekic. She just won a
Oh wow.
tournament in Mexico, so she's been doing that. But she came out with her story about in being in a relationship with her coach when she was a
Yes.
teenager,
Yes.
and she wanted to put that out because she sees this continuing to happen
Yeah.
at the professional level. But she told me in the course of our discussion, Barry, that at all the tournaments down the WTA tour, we used to go and we go to the training room, and then over years later there'd be a massage room, or they'd hire massage people. Now there's a mental health
Yeah.
professional on site,
Right.
which is a great step, which, as you mentioned, thanks in part to the Naomi Osakas and Marty Fishes
Right.
of the world for putting this out there, and to people like you. What do you think could happen or should happen? I know you've got your Kickstarter program, which you hope will be part of this solution in junior tennis, because to me, that's where it's really needed in
Right.
more than ever. I mean, we've all seen. I've been traveling around with my own daughter with kids
Yeah.
in our academy over the last 5-6 years. I mean, some of this stuff you see is just horrendous.
Yeah,
From
it hasn't
parents.
gotten a lot better in 40
And
years.
arguably worse because of
Arguably worse, yeah.
what's at stake for a lot of these kids, and
Right.
not just becoming professionals, but now I see a lot of people do this just to get into college, to get a scholarship. So in your dream, what would you like to see happen over the course of the next 5 to 10 years to
You
help
know,
those
I,
people?
I think when you think about, let's say you're going to go to the beach, right? We're going to bring some sunblock, a towel. We're going to check the water conditions. Anytime you go into another environment, we want to check the situation. If we move to a new neighborhood, is there crime, education, sports, etc.? We just throw kids into tennis tournaments without a single thought of what we're doing. And so I think one of the things that they should do before any child can be signed up for a USTA sanctioned event, the parents need to take a basic course. Okay. And I
Mm.
think
Mhm.
continuing education, because listen, it's one thing when you're playing the 10 and under, level 7 at your club. Okay. And then all of a sudden you're seated at Kalamazoo. That a lot of things happen between then and there. So I think continuing education, a yearly something annually where the parents have to stay up to speed on this stuff, and educating the kids, because I think this, and you're a parent of teenagers, kids aren't going to be able to tell us what's going on. Your daughter's not going to come to you and say, my stress cortisol levels are up a little bit. Can you,
Right.
it's not at all, but they're going to show us. And they're going to show us in a variety of behaviors. And it's so important, and I think back on my situation, I got away with a variety of behaviors for a long time. And by the time people started realizing something wasn't right, it had metastasized to me so badly that I was in trouble already. And it's not that easy to untangle those wires later. So I think in junior tennis, I think absolutely making the coaches, I even reached out to Mr. Embry at the USPTA, making this part of the curriculum now. They have a lot of
Right.
continuing education, make this mandatory, that coaches, emotional literacy has to be taught for coaches. So, how to deal with your kids in all the various states of competition and distress, and I'll have the parents involved and have the kids involved. Kids take responsibility. Have them take regular emotional stress reactivity tests, emotional intelligence tests. Chart your course. You know where you want to get to. If you want to compete like Rafa, you got to know where you are. Get your GPS. Where are you, and where do you want to get? And let's chart a course. And it's not going to be the smooth linear course. It's complicated out there. But I feel the main thing is to teach these kids and develop an immune system. We have an immune system against all the diseases that are out there that are so harmful to us. Well, there's a lot of emotional stress in the tennis world, and build these tools in these kids so they understand how to have healthy perspective, to be grateful, to check their vital signs, to see if they're burnout, or if they're nervous, if they're stressing, and deal with all the particulars of being an adolescent. Because just being an adolescent in and of itself is challenging enough, and to add all this extra stress onto it, and just be really, really present with this, and data driven. Though we can chart this and see if that's what I'm going to be trying to do this summer with my curriculum courses, to get this course out to as many people as you can, see where they are. Let's take some steps, make it a practice. You practice your serve. Let's practice your emotional intelligence every single day. Hit your buckets, read your books, read your affirmations, and let's just see if we can make a difference here. And not everyone is going to get onto this, but I think we can make a noticeable impact on kids. I think.
Well, you made a difference already, Barry. You're charting your own course now in your 50s, like we're all trying to do. And again, I'm going to hold up the book for you one more
Thank you.
time. You can get there from here. It's an absolute must read. Whether you're a tennis fan or not, but it's particularly if you're a tennis fan, because
There's a lot
I
of
know a
tennis in
lot of the
there.
players. It's some amazing stories, but more than that, it's a story of a journey, a real journey. And you were talking to me when you were working on the book, when you were thinking about it. In fact, the foreword is from yours truly, so you could
Yes,
read
thank
my
you.
foreword in it as well. But it's just an incredible read, and I want to say thank you again for doing what you're doing, for coming on the podcast. That goes without saying, but for dedicating yourself to giving back, Barry, because
Thank you.
that's what
Thank
you're
you.
doing. And I know it means a lot to you, and couldn't be prouder to be your friend that you're doing it.
Thank you, my man. Much appreciated.
Barry Buss, everyone, on Holding Court.
Holding Court is powered by Mudhouse Media.